Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine a world before cities, before names, before even memory itself. The sky is wider, the air sharper, and the earth moves in rhythms too slow for any heartbeat to follow. Mountains breathe under veils of mist. Oceans whisper in languages forgotten by time. And far above the sun watches a planet preparing to dream. This is not the world you know. It is the world that came before a realm of cold and silence, where every snowflake carries a secret. Tonight we return there to listen to the earth as it fell asleep. The story begins long before us, before voices, before the warmth of fires, when the world was still learning to breathe. The earth turned slowly beneath a pale sun, and the air itself seemed to pause between heartbeats. Oceans lay still, heavy with the weight of waiting. Then, quietly, the change began. A whisper in the sky, a tilt so small no creature could feel it, yet enough to reshape the destiny of the planet. Summers cooled, winters deepened. Snow began to linger on the mountains, refusing to melt. And with each passing century, the world drew in a slow, icy breath. At first it was beautiful. The forests wore silver crowns of frost. Rivers froze into glass ribbons that shimmered in the faint light. But beauty can be deceptive. Beneath that stillness, power gathered, silent, patient, unstoppable. Layer by layer, snow piled upon snow, pressing down until it hardened into ice. And that ice began to move so slowly that even the mountains did not notice. Yet it was moving, spreading, creeping forward like a dream too vast to wake from. The earth had entered its long sleep. Imagine standing there on a day that would never be remembered. You are on a plain that will one day be buried beneath miles of ice. The air tastes clean and thin. The wind hums softly across an empty world. There are no human voices, no songs, only the rhythm of the planet itself. Above you, the sun glows pale as if seen through a veil of frost. Time has slowed to the pace of snowflakes drifting from a quiet sky. For thousands of years, the transformation continued unnoticed by the fleeting lives that came and went. Lakes disappeared under frozen lids. Mountains bowed beneath the gathering weight. Valleys filled with a cold silence so complete, it seemed eternal. Yet this was not death, it was change. The earth was not dying, it was dreaming. Deep within the growing ice, air bubbles formed tiny prisons of breath from another age. They would remain there for eons, silent witnesses to the world's transformation. The continents themselves shifted under the burden of glaciers, miles thick, their slow grinding shaping the face of the planet. Even now, those scars remain, the valleys carved into perfect U-shapes. The boulders stranded far from their birthplace, left behind like forgotten thoughts of stone. But in this frozen stillness, life did not vanish. Beneath the snow seeds waited buried, but alive. In the dark oceans, creatures continued their silent dance, their tiny hearts beating against the chill. Life, fragile yet unyielding, found ways to hold on. It curled up beneath the frost, hid within the cracks of ice, and whispered, "Wait." The air grew thinner, the world quieter. The line between night and day blurred, and still the snow fell gentle, yet relentless. If you stood there then, you might have felt a strange calm like the hush before sleep. You would have heard the soft hiss of snow meeting snow. the faint groan of glaciers, far away the heartbeat of a planet surrendering to the rhythm of cold. It is said that time moves differently when the world grows silent. Perhaps that is true. During the Ice Age, a single year passed like a sigh, 1,000 years like a single blink. The earth moved through cycles of cold and warmth, yet to those who lived within it there was no beginning or end, only endurance. Far away in regions untouched by ice, rain still fell, and forests still whispered. But even there, the change could be felt. Winds carried the scent of snow across the continents. Animals migrated south, chasing warmth that was slowly retreating. And somewhere hidden in the heart of the cold, the first flicker of humanity stirred a spark, waiting for its moment to burn. But that moment was still far away. For now, the earth belonged to the ice, and the ice belonged to silence. The land itself seemed to breathe with the rhythm of the glaciers, slow, steady, eternal. If you could listen closely enough, you might hear it, a deep, distant sound, the pulse of the planet beneath miles of frozen light. And as you listen now, with eyes half closed and heart steady, you can almost feel that same rhythm echoing within you. Because in every one of us lies a trace of that ancient cold, a memory of endurance, of quiet, of beginnings. So let the story unfold slowly like snow drifting over an endless plain. Let your mind rest in the calm of that frozen dawn. The world was not yet awake. It was dreaming softly beneath the weight of its own creation. And as we follow its dream, you too can drift into your own, where time has no urgency, and the earth turns gently under a sky of pale light. If you've enjoyed wandering through this frozen beginning, where silence feels like music and the stars seem closer than ever, remember to subscribe to Gentle Sleep Stories. There, every night, I'll guide you through more quiet worlds and soft horizons, stories that help you rest, breathe, and dream. Now, close your eyes. The wind is rising. The snow begins to fall again. And the Ice Age has only just begun. The earth still slept beneath its silver blanket. The wind whispered softly over frozen plains, carrying the faint memory of a time before the cold. Deep within the ice, the planet's heart still beat slow, steady, patient. And though everything seemed still, nothing truly was. Beneath the weight of silence, the world was moving, changing, breathing. In the hush of that ancient dawn, the earth began its slow dance. To the human eye, it would have seemed motionless, yet the rhythm of the planet never stopped. It tilted slightly, wobbled gently, and with each breath of its orbit, the light shifted, soft and uncertain. The sun's warmth touched the northern lands a little less each year. Summers shortened, and winters lingered like uninvited guests. And in that quiet imbalance, the first great glaciers were born. Snow that once melted with the coming of spring now stayed behind, building upon itself year after year. It pressed downward under its own weight until it transformed into solid ice blue and ancient clear as captured time. At first, these patches of ice were small, like sleeping beasts in the valleys. But as centuries passed, they grew. Their edges crept forward slowly, silently, yet with unyielding purpose. The glaciers began their long march, reshaping the world grain by grain. Imagine standing on a high ridge, watching a river made not of water, but of frozen light. It moves so slowly that you might believe it's still, but it never stops. Beneath its calm surface, a deep, ancient strength flows forward. The glacier groans as it grinds over rock, carving deep valleys and mountains into new shapes. Every crack, every echo is the voice of the earth remaking itself. Time here is not counted by seasons or years, but by ages. A single inch of ice might take a lifetime to move, yet across millennia, that inch becomes an ocean. Mountains bow under its pressure. Rivers vanish, replaced by endless fields of frost. The very ground sinks beneath the weight, only to rise again when the ice retreats thousands of years later. The earth, though frozen, is never still. Above it all, the sky remains pale and wide, the color of distant dreams. Sunlight glints across the endless ice, scattering in 1,000 tiny sparkles like stars that have fallen and chosen never to rise again. In this quiet world, sound carries differently. The wind hums low through the canyons of ice, and somewhere far away a glacier cracks with a deep, resonant sigh like the exhale of a sleeping god. Yet this was not a lifeless place. Beneath the heavy silence, small seeds waited in the dark soil, locked away under frost, but holding the promise of spring. In the distant oceans, plankton and coral carried on their delicate work, turning sunlight into life. Even here in the frozen heart of the world, life whispered softly, "I am still here." Scientists thousands of years later would find the evidence of this quiet motion, tiny bubbles of air trapped deep within the ice. Inside those bubbles, the breath of an ancient sky still waits unchanged. Through them, we can hear the faint rhythm of the Earth's pulse, the rise and fall of cold and warmth over millions of years. But for the creatures that lived through it, there was no science, no memory, only endurance. The glaciers became rivers of time, moving across continents, pushing soil and stone, carrying mountains upon their backs. They erased old landscapes and drew new ones like a painter layering centuries of color over a single canvas. And though their progress was glacial, their reach was infinite. The land itself bore their fingerprints. Far to the south, where the ice had not yet claimed dominion, forests trembled under the changing air. Winds grew colder, carrying dust and the distant scent of snow. Animals began to wander, herds of deer, musk, oxen, and the first great mammoths following instinct toward the warmth that was slowly fading. Each step they took carried them into the history of the earth itself. It's strange to think how easily the world can change, not with violence, but with patience. The cold did not arrive like a storm. It came softly with the quiet certainty of a tide. Year after year, century after century, it crept forward until even the stars seemed to shine colder. And the earth, wrapped in its icy cocoon, surrendered to the rhythm of its long sleep. If you could stand there now at the edge of that frozen horizon, you would hear almost nothing, only the faint murmur of wind and the distant echo of time. Yet beneath your feet, continents were shifting, oceans were lowering, and the balance of the planet was rewriting itself. Everything you know, the rivers, the valleys, the soil beneath your home, was being shaped in that silence. As the millennia passed, the glaciers spread like living beings. They reached from the northern poles down across what would one day be Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Their sheer faces glistened in the dim sunlight walls of blue and white, taller than any cathedral, stretching farther than the eye could see. Beneath them, the earth moaned softly as stone surrendered to the patient pressure of ice. And still, the rhythm continued. Warm periods came and the glaciers pulled back, revealing land stripped bare. Then, as the planet tilted once more, the cold returned and the ice advanced again. The earth breathed in and out, glacial and interglacial, a heartbeat of tens of thousands of years. The balance was delicate but eternal, a slow dance between light and darkness, warmth and frost. When you listen closely, you can almost hear it, the music of deep time. It doesn't rush, it flows. It carries the stories of mountains, the whispers of dust, the footsteps of ancient beasts yet to come. It is the sound of a world in motion, too grand for the eye but perfect for the soul to feel. And so the earth kept turning, wrapped in its glittering shroud, patient, as sleep alive as a dream. The glaciers carved not only stone, but memory. They shaped the world we now walk upon. The lakes, the fertile plains, the valleys filled with rivers, all gifts of that frozen age. As we drift now into the heart of this icy dream, remember that the stillness of the world is never empty. Beneath every silence lies motion. Beneath every frost lies fire. The glaciers were not prisons of cold. They were instruments of creation, sculpting beauty through endurance. Close your eyes now and imagine it, the steady hum of the earth beneath ice, the shimmering of distant sunlight, the patience of time itself unfolding. The world is still moving softly beneath its frozen breath. And tomorrow, when we awaken again, we'll follow the path of that ice, to see the lives it touched, the creatures it shaped, and the fragile warmth that dared to bloom in its shadow. If you'd like to keep walking through these quiet worlds, where the wind sings of history and the snow remembers every step, remember to subscribe to Gentle Sleep Stories. Each night we'll journey a little further together through time, silence, and dream. Now rest as the earth once did. The ice moves slowly, and so should we. The glaciers continued their patient march across the continents, whispering their frozen language to the mountains and seas. Beneath them, the world slept, reshaped in silence. But above the endless plains of ice, the sky began to change. Winds rose, dust drifted, and though the earth still lay quiet, the heavens had begun to stir with a different kind of motion, one that would paint the air in strange colors and fill the stillness with breath once more. The air during the Ice Age was not the air we know. It was thinner, colder, and restless, a living thing that never truly slept. The sky stretched vast and pale, its blue washed out by fine grains of dust carried from faraway lands. When the wind blew, it carried the memory of stone-crushed mountains, powdered into silence by the glaciers' slow grinding. Each gust was like the sigh of the earth itself, exhaling what it could no longer hold. Imagine standing beneath that sky. The horizon disappears in a silver haze, where the sun burns weakly through a curtain of drifting dust. The light feels fragile, filtered through the breath of the frozen world. The air has a dry taste, sharp, metallic, ancient. Even your heartbeat seems to echo louder here, surrounded by so much emptiness. This is not the quiet of death. It is the quiet of waiting. The glaciers had carved the land into open plains and jagged ridges, leaving behind soil bare and raw. With no forests to hold it, The earth rose easily into the air, carried by the fierce northern winds that scoured the continents. Across what would one day be Asia, Europe, and the Americas, these winds built unseen bridges weaving the world together through dust. Everywhere, the air shimmered. The sun was dimmed. The moon appeared larger, its glow scattered by the fine veil of particles that circled the planet. Days were long and colorless. Nights clear but cold enough to freeze the breath mid-air. This was the atmosphere of the Ice Age, not lifeless but harsh, demanding, and strangely beautiful. In that strange balance of light and shadow, the world became a painting made of muted tones. The snow glowed softly beneath the dim sun, and the wind sculpted delicate ridges across the frozen plains. Each morning, the horizon seemed to breathe, rising and falling as the winds carried dust from one end of the earth to another. These winds were more than messengers of cold. They shaped everything. They smoothed the faces of mountains, buried valleys beneath layers of fine silt, and carved the great plains that would one day feed entire civilizations. The dust they carried was rich with minerals, tiny gifts of the glacier's labor, and when it finally settled, it nourished the seeds that waited beneath the frost. Even in desolation, creation continued. But for those who lived beneath this sky, the animals, the plants, the first fragile humans, it was a world of constant movement. Herds of mammoths and bison roamed where the wind was kind, following the currents that swept away the snow to reveal hidden patches of grass. The predators followed in turn, reading the language of the air as surely as the trails in the snow. At night, when the winds calmed, the silence returned. The stars emerged with impossible clarity, scattered across the sky like frost on black stone. To stand there wrapped in furs beneath that endless night was to feel both small and infinite, a single breath within the vast lungs of the earth. The wind that brushed your face might have crossed an ocean, danced over ice cliffs, and carried stories from places you could never imagine. Sometimes volcanic fires deep within the earth added their own voice to the song of the wind. Eruptions sent ash into the sky, darkening the daylight for months. The temperature fell even lower. The glaciers seized these moments to advance, pushing farther into the lands that had briefly thawed. And yet, even in that deepening cold, the dust continued to fall. Silent snow made not of water, but of time, ground to powder. If you could walk across the plains, then you might see strange patterns written in the drifting sand and silt. Long curving lines, ridges, and shallow valleys, formed not by rivers, but by the breath of the wind. And when the sun set, the air would glow faintly gold before surrendering again to the soft blue of twilight. The air carried more than dust. It carried memory. Every particle held a trace of a mountain, a forest, a sea long vanished beneath the ice. Each grain that landed was a story from somewhere else, the quiet record of what had been lost and what might one day return. Even now, those ancient winds are not forgotten. In the heart of China's yellow plains, in the soils of North America, in the rolling farmlands of Europe, the same fine layers of loess remain, soft, fertile earth born from the patience of the Ice Age. The wind that once scoured the world left behind the foundation of its future abundance. And as the dust settled, the air grew still again, but only for a moment. For the Ice Age was a restless painter. Its brush never stopped moving, cold and warmth danced their slow, eternal waltz, and with each turn, the world changed shape once more. If you listen closely even now, you might still hear it. The faint hum of that ancient wind, the whisper of dust crossing the sky, the voice of a planet forever breathing in and out. The sky of the Ice Age was not blue and gentle as ours. It was an ocean of motion, carrying whispers from every corner of the earth. And within that restless breath, life found a way, bending, adapting, surviving. Because even in the coldest silence, there is always movement. So as you rest tonight, let your thoughts drift with the wind. Picture the slow swirl of dust over frozen plains, the faint shimmer of sunlight through a pale horizon, the quiet hum of time passing like a breeze through your dreams. The earth has always moved this way, gently, endlessly, creating through stillness. And as the winds begin to calm, they carry us to the next part of our journey, to the rivers of ice themselves, and the secrets they carve deep into the bones of the world. Close your eyes and let the wind fade. Tomorrow we will walk where glaciers flow, where the frozen rivers of time shape the mountains, and whisper to the stars. The wind slowly began to rest. The dust that had once drifted endlessly through the air settled softly over the sleeping earth. The world stood quiet again, wrapped in the faint glow of twilight. But beneath that stillness, something immense was stirring. The glaciers, patient and powerful, were waking. And as they moved, the face of the planet itself began to change forever. They did not flow like water nor rush like storms. They moved with the quiet strength of time itself, vast, unhurried, unstoppable. The glaciers were the Earth's slowest rivers, born from snow that refused to die. Each flake that fell upon the ground was pressed down by the weight of countless winters, until it became crystal, and then ice, and then a force that could shape continents. If you could stand upon one of those glaciers, you would see a world of frozen motion. The ice beneath your feet is not still. It slides forward inch by inch, creaking and sighing as it grinds against the stone below. Cracks echo like distant thunder. The air is sharp, filled with the faint scent of snow and crushed rock. Around you the light is strange blue, silver, and endless. Even the sky seems quieter here, as though it listens in reverence to the ancient rhythm of the ice. These frozen rivers carved the bones of the earth. They bit into the mountains, slicing valleys into deep, smooth curves. They scoured plains into flat expanses that would one day cradle lakes and forests. Beneath their weight, the ground yielded, bending slowly downward, and when the ice finally retreated, the land rose again, reborn, breathing once more after a slumber of millennia. Imagine a glacier stretching farther than your eyes can see. Its face towers higher than any cathedral, a wall of shimmering glass. Beneath its surface lies the memory of centuries, each layer a record of seasons past. Some are dusted with volcanic ash. Some carry ancient air trapped within tiny bubbles. And all are witnesses to the slow, patient story of the world. Every sound here carries far. The low groan of the ice shifting echoes through the valleys. The distant crack of a fissure opening sends shivers through the air. Sometimes meltwater pools form at the glacier's edge, quiet and still, until the pressure grows too great. Then, without warning, they burst free. rivers roaring across the land, tearing paths through rock and soil before vanishing into the sea. These floods are the Earth's exhale, a reminder that even in stillness power waits. And yet, for all its might, there is grace in the way the ice moves. Nothing in the natural world hurries as slowly or as surely. It knows no rush, no hesitation. It simply moves forward year by year, century by century, carving the world with hands made of silence. When the sunlight falls across the glacier's surface, it shimmers with 1,000 shades of white and blue. The ice beneath glows with its own quiet light, a ghostly beauty that feels alive. Tiny streams run through cracks, their water so clear it seems invisible. They carry fine dust rock ground so small by the glacier's passing that it becomes like smoke. And when the streams dry, that dust remains, forming the soil from which future forests will grow. In those days, the world was both fragile and eternal. The glaciers covered almost everything north of the equator. North America lay beneath the vast Laurentide ice sheet, its weight so great it pressed the continent down. In Europe, the Fennoscandian ice sheet stretched across the north, its frozen fingers reaching into the heart of the continent. Even in the southern hemisphere, mountain ranges in South America and New Zealand bore crowns of ice glinting beneath the pale sun. To walk the edge of such a glacier would be to stand at the boundary between life and silence. Behind you, the frozen plain gleamed like a mirror to the sky. Before you, valleys lay exposed, raw, and waiting. In the distance, you could hear the soft trickle of meltwater, a fragile sound against the vastness of the cold. It was there, in those thin margins between ice and earth, that life began to return. Moss crept forward, painting gray stone with faint green. Lichens anchored themselves in the cracks, and when the ice withdrew, they were the first to greet the newborn land. These glaciers were sculptors, though they carved not with tools, but with time. Every ridge, every hill, every U-shaped valley that exists today carries their signature. They reshaped the rivers, rerouted the winds, and left behind lakes where none had been before. The Great Lakes of North America. Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario are their fingerprints, filled with the meltwater of their slow farewell. When you look upon the world today, the smooth hills of Scandinavia, the rolling plains of Canada, the fertile valleys of Europe, you are seeing the afterimage of the Ice Age's long touch. It is strange to think that such beauty came from something so cold, so patient. The glaciers destroyed and created in the same breath, their weight both a burden and a blessing. Sometimes in the depth of their silence you could hear the faintest sound, a deep, resonant hum. Scientists today know it as the vibration of ice moving against the earth. But in that ancient world it might have sounded like the earth's own heartbeat. It was steady, slow, and eternal. And when the glaciers finally began to melt, when the air grew warm enough to awaken the world again, they did not disappear quietly. They left behind stories written in water and stone, rivers that would one day nourish civilizations, valleys that would cradle cities, and soils rich enough to feed generations yet unborn. To listen to their story is to understand time in its purest form, not as a clock or a number, but as movement, endless and kind. The glaciers did not rush. They taught the earth to breathe in cycles, to freeze, to thaw, to rest, to begin again. So tonight, as you drift toward sleep, Imagine those rivers of ice stretching across the horizon. Feel the steady rhythm of their movement, the deep calm of their power. Each inch they moved was a century. Each breath of wind carried the sound of a mountain being born. The glaciers have long since retreated, but their song remains in the rivers in the valleys, in the very shape of the land beneath your feet. And as the earth warmed, new stories began to unfold, stories of life returning, of creatures rising to roam the open plains that the glaciers had left behind. Let us follow that warmth now into the world that waited beyond the ice, where giants walked, and the frozen earth began to breathe once more. When the last echoes of the glacier's deep hum faded, the world slowly began to open its eyes again. The ice, though still vast and heavy, had carved its mark and stepped back just enough to let the sun breathe warmth over the plains. From the heart of the cold came movement, shadows across the snow, shapes too immense to be forgotten. The earth, once wrapped in silence, was about to awaken to the thunder of footsteps. They came quietly at first, their breath steaming in the pale air, their shadows stretching across the frozen horizon. The world was still cold, still marked by ice. Yet life had returned in grand and improbable forms. To live in the age of glaciers was to share the earth with giants. They moved with solemn grace, each step pressing deep into the snow, leaving behind trails that would be buried for centuries and found again only in dreams. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast white plain, the wind calm for once, the air glimmering faintly under a low sun. In the distance, a herd of woolly mammoths moves across the steppe, their long tusks gleaming like crescent moons. They move in slow rhythm, the sound of their footsteps muffled by snow, their shaggy coats catching the light with hints of gold and ash. They are ancient guardians of the cold, their presence both comforting and immense. Beside them roam mastodons, stockier forest-dwelling cousins with straight tusks and deep, intelligent eyes. They tear bark from trees and breathe clouds into the frosted air. When they move, the earth trembles softly, as though recognizing its own children. The mammoths and mastodons are not alone. Around them graze herds of bison, their shoulders broad, their coats thick enough to bear the sting of the wind. Musk oxen gather in tight circles when predators approach, facing outward in silence, as if praying together against the cold. Across the horizon, reindeer trace long paths, their hooves cutting delicate prints into the snow. They move in unison, guided by instincts older than the mountains. This frozen land, though harsh and spare, is alive. Every breath of wind carries the scent of life. It is a world of movement and endurance, where survival is not a battle, but a rhythm shared among creatures who have learned to listen to the cold. But where there is life, there is also hunger. In the shadow of these herds, predators follow the dire wolves, powerful and relentless, their fur thick and dark, their eyes sharp with hunger. They move like ghosts, their tracks weaving between those of their prey. Then there are the great cats, saber-toothed tigers, crouched low in the frost, their muscles coiled beneath fur, their long curved fangs glinting like polished ivory. When they strike, they do so with precision and silence, vanishing again into the stillness. Above them all, the cave lion roams, larger than any lion of today, its golden coat blending with the pale light. It moves not with cruelty, but with purpose, as though the hunt itself were a sacred act, part of the balance that keeps the world alive. For every predator that feeds another day of life begins for the herd. In this frozen kingdom, even the act of killing carries a strange grace, an unspoken understanding that life depends on death, and death returns to life again through the endless snow. The air is filled with sound if you know how to hear it: the low murmur of herds, the crunch of frost beneath hooves, the distant cry of a hunting wolf. Above it all, the wind carries a steady hum, as if the earth itself is singing softly beneath its blanket of white. In this ancient world, everything is connected: each breath, each movement, each silence. The giants ruled not through violence, but through presence. They endured what smaller creatures could not. Their thick coats and layers of fat shielded them from the bitter wind. Their great size gave them strength against hunger and cold. And yet even these mighty beings were shaped by the glaciers that surrounded them. They followed the rhythms of ice and thaw, migrating with the seasons, moving south when the cold deepened, returning north when the light began to grow. The landscape they crossed was not barren, though it seemed so from afar. Beneath the snow, hardy grasses waited. When the brief summer arrived, these grasses sprang to life, rich and sweet, covering the plains with green. The herds feasted, gathering strength for the long winter ahead. The balance between ice and life was delicate but enduring. Every creature had a place within it, a role written by the slow turning of the earth itself. And humans, though few and fragile, watched from the edges of this vast theater. From their fires along the glacier's rim, they saw the mammoths move like living mountains, and they felt something stir within themselves: wonder, respect, and perhaps the first spark of reverence. They painted these creatures on the walls of their caves, tracing their shapes with ochre and charcoal, capturing in art what words could not yet express. To them, the mammoth was not just food or danger. It was mystery, power, and kinship. The world of giants was not meant to last forever. It was a fleeting miracle born from the cold and sustained by it. But for thousands upon thousands of years, it flourished, stretching across continents, in a harmony so vast that it seems almost like a dream. Today we see only its traces: the fossils locked in frozen soil, the tusks unearthed from melting permafrost, the paintings that still glow softly in the dark corners of ancient caves. Yet if you close your eyes, you can almost feel it again: the tremor beneath your feet as the herds pass by, the sound of snow shifting under enormous weight, the distant call of wolves echoing across an endless horizon. You can almost sense the cold air brushing your skin, the light of a weak sun glinting off 1,000 glacial mirrors. For a moment you stand in the presence of the giants. They are gone now, but the world still remembers them. Every mountain valley shaped by the ice, every fossil hidden in the tundra, every story told by wind and snow carries a fragment of their existence. The earth does not forget its giants. It carries their memory in its bones. And so, as we leave this frozen plain and step deeper into the story, the world begins to change once more. The ice continues to breathe, and life continues to eddy. Beneath the same pale sky, the cycle endures: ice, wind, life, and time, forever intertwined. Rest now, and imagine the slow, steady march of mammoths beneath the stars. Listen to the rhythm of their steps fading into the distance, For even in silence they still walk through memory, through earth, through you. Long after the herds of mammoths vanished into the white horizon, and the echo of their steps faded into the wind, the land grew quiet again. The great beasts continued their eternal migration, but beneath them, another world stirred, smaller, hidden, fragile, and yet no less alive. Beneath the weight of snow and the breath of the cold, an unseen kingdom was unfolding, where life whispered softly, unseen by the eyes of giants. Beneath the blinding white, under layers of frost and silence, the earth was still breathing. The snow that covered the world was not only a shroud of stillness, it was a shelter, a blanket of quiet warmth preserving the pulse of life below. Within this hidden realm, the rhythm of existence continued slower, gentler, but just as determined as the creatures that roamed above. If you could sink through the snow and listen closely, you would hear it, the faint rustle of movement, the soft scratching of paws through tunnels, the heartbeat of the frozen soil. There, where the sun's light rarely reached, small miracles unfolded each day. Tiny mammals, their bodies no larger than a human hand, dug their way through the powdery drifts, carving paths invisible to the eyes of those above. The lemming was among the bravest of these small wanderers. Beneath the layers of ice, it built a labyrinth of tunnels where it stored seeds and roots gathered before the winter came. Its fur, thick and silver gray, blended perfectly with the snow. Even in the coldest months, it moved constantly, never surrendering to stillness. It was not built for grandeur, but for persistence. And in that persistence, it became a symbol of life's quiet courage. Nearby, the Arctic fox waited patiently at the edge of this secret world. Its coat, white as the snow itself, was a masterpiece of disguise. When hunger struck, it listened for the faint movements below, then dove headfirst into the drifts, breaking through the surface in a burst of frost and determination. Each leap was a gamble between survival and silence. Yet even in its hunt, the fox was part of the same delicate balance that governed everything in this frozen land. The snow, for all its weight, was a paradox, both burden and blessing. It isolated, yet it protected. It sealed the world in ice, yet kept the warmth below from vanishing into the endless cold, like a mother holding her child close. The earth wrapped its smallest creatures in layers of silence and frost, guarding them against the merciless winds above. Even the plants had their secrets. Beneath the snow they slept, roots intertwined, sap slowed to a whisper, leaves curled into memories of green. When spring returned, these tiny survivors would awaken first, reaching upward through melting snow to catch the returning light. They waited without fear, for they understood what the cold could not destroy. Sometimes when the wind was still and the night clear, the aurora painted the sky above these buried worlds. Its green and violet lights shimmered through the darkness like the breath of heaven touching the earth. Below, the snow reflected those colors, faintly turning even the frozen ground into something holy, a sanctuary where life endured unseen but unbroken. It is easy to think of the Ice Age as a time of emptiness, a desolate silence without warmth or hope. But that silence was alive. Every grain of snow held the potential for renewal. Every frozen river carried the promise of motion. The world was not waiting for the cold to end. It was learning to live within it. The great herds above the snow depended on this hidden world. Beneath, the ice plants preserved their roots, ready to bloom when the thaw came. Small creatures stored seeds that would later sprout into meadows. Even the predators owed their survival to the tiny lives that thrived unseen below. Without them, the surface world, the giants, the hunters, the herds would have vanished into nothing. And so life in the Ice Age was a conversation between light and shadow, between above and below. What froze above bloomed below. What fell asleep in the snow would awaken in spring. The earth, though frozen, was not at rest. It was thinking, dreaming, preparing for what was to come. Imagine yourself there standing on the frozen plain at dusk. The cold presses against your skin, but beneath your feet, you can almost sense the warmth of the hidden world. You hear the faintest stirrings beneath the surface, the quick heartbeats of creatures you cannot see, the gentle rustle of roots stretching through the frost. The snow that once seemed endless now feels alive, breathing softly with the promise of return. Even in that deep, cold beauty endured. The musk ox, with its long, dark fur and calm eyes, stood against the wind without flinching. Snow gathered on its back, but never melted proof of its perfect adaptation. Birds, too, found ways to survive. Some, like the snowy owl, remained through the long winter, their feathers thick and white, their golden eyes piercing the dim light of dawn. They hunted with patience, gliding silently above the snow like living shadows. And beneath it all, the insects, fragile, delicate, learned to freeze without dying. Their bodies produced a kind of natural anti-freeze, allowing them to rest until warmth returned. Life refused to yield, bending only enough to survive. In this frozen quiet, everything had a role. The snow protected, the wind shaped, the ice tested, and through it all, the smallest of creatures carried the world on their backs. When spring finally returned, as it always did, they would be the first to greet it, bursting through the melting crust of snow, carrying the memory of winter within them. If the world above was a tale of grandeur, the world below was one of grace. It whispered rather than shouted, but its voice was eternal. Beneath the endless white, in tunnels of ice and soil, life kept its promise. It endured the long night, believing in the dawn. So as you rest tonight, think of that hidden kingdom. Picture the quiet movement beneath the snow, the faint heat of breath against frozen air, the soft hum of life that never stopped even when the world seemed lost to the cold. The snow may fall endlessly, but beneath it, the earth still dreams. Tomorrow the dream will rise again, carried by sunlight and the rhythm of the thaw. The hidden world will open its eyes, and from its heart, the next chapter of the Ice Age will begin, the age of rivers, mountains, and movement, where the glaciers themselves will awaken once more. When the long night of winter began to soften, when the sun lingered a little longer on the horizon, and the snow loosened its grip on the land, life stirred once more. The quiet tunnels beneath the frost gave way to open plains, and the cold winds carried not only dust, but the breath of living things. It was in this fragile awakening between ice and light that a new kind of being began to rise. They were small compared to the giants that roamed before them, but within their hearts burned a fire that no glacier could ever extinguish. The first humans of the Ice Age did not rule their world. They survived within it. Against the immensity of the frozen earth, they were as fragile as sparks in a storm, yet their light endured. They walked across lands sculpted by ice, through valleys still echoing with the roar of glaciers, and along rivers newly born from melting snow. Wrapped in furs, faces drawn with endurance and wonder, they carried within them something that no other creature possessed, the ability to imagine warmth even in the heart of the cold. If you could see them now gathered around a flickering flame at the edge of a glacier, you would notice the stillness first. The air is thin and sharp, the night sky stretched wide and pale. Around the small fire sit a handful of figures, men, women, children, silent, except for the crackle of burning wood. Their breath rises in small clouds that shimmer in the light. Each of them knows that this fragile circle of warmth is all that stands between life and the endless frost. They build their shelters low to the ground, made from what the land provides. Wood is scarce in this treeless plain, so they turn to the bones of mammoths, vast ribs and tusks, forming the frames of huts. Over these, they stretch thick hides, sealing out the wind. Inside, the air smells faintly of smoke and animal fat. It is warm enough to sleep, warm enough to dream. Around the fire, they cook the meat they have hunted, their shadows moving softly along the curved walls. The faint glow touches their faces, revealing eyes full of patience and memory. Fire is more than warmth to them. It is life itself. Its light draws them together. It turns fear into focused darkness, into safety. Each flame is a small sun, a symbol of endurance against the unending night. It cooks their food, hardens their weapons, and protects them from the predators that stalk the edges of their camps. When they feed the fire, they are not merely keeping it alive. They are keeping hope itself from fading. Their tools are simple, but ingenious, sharp flakes of flint-carved bones, smooth antlers. From stone and instinct, they craft the instruments of survival: spears with fire-hardened tips, scrapers for hides, needles for stitching furs together. Every mark on these tools carries a lesson passed from one generation to the next. The story of adaptation written not in words, but in hands. Hunting is a test of courage and unity. They move together through the snow, following the faint tracks of reindeer and mammoth. Their breath comes in soft puffs that hang in the air before vanishing into the wind. Each step is measured, each sound intentional. When they hunt, they do not see themselves as conquerors, but as participants in the great rhythm of life. They respect the creatures they pursue, whispering silent prayers of gratitude before the kill. In their world, survival and reverence are the same thing. At night, when the hunt is over, stories fill the air. The elders speak in low voices, their words slow and rhythmic, echoing the sound of the wind outside. They tell tales of the animals of the mammoth, who remembers the mountains of the wolf, who guards the moon of the spirit of fire, who watches over the living. These stories are more than entertainment. They are maps of meaning, guiding the people through the mysteries of their world. Around the firelight, imagination becomes their most powerful tool. The children listen with wide eyes, tracing shapes in the smoke above them. In the shifting light, the line between story and life blurs. Outside, the wind howls like a living thing. Inside, someone hums softly, a sound older than language, perhaps the first song ever sung. In this fragile warmth, the first seeds of humanity's soul are being planted. The cold tests them relentlessly. Frost creeps through the cracks of their shelters. Blizzards erase their tracks. Yet they endure. They learn to read the stars, to find their way across the frozen plains. They learn the rhythm of the herds, the moods of the rivers, the safe paths through the valleys of ice. Each lesson is written in their bones, passed from mother to child, from hunter to apprentice. They are not merely surviving, they are learning to belong to the earth itself. Sometimes when the night is clear, they look out from their camp and see the great herds moving like shadows against the horizon. The mammoths, the bison, the reindeer all moving together silent, except for the deep crunch of snow beneath their feet. In those moments, humanity feels both small and infinite, a flicker of warmth in a vast, breathing world. And though they do not yet know it, these people are shaping the future. The marks. They leave the tools buried in the soil, the hearths filled with ashes. The faint carvings on stone will one day be found by those who come long after them. Each trace will whisper the same truth, that life, no matter how fragile, finds a way to endure. The ice may cover the land, but it cannot freeze the spirit. In every heartbeat, in every shared breath, in every spark of the fire, the story of humanity grows stronger. They do not yet build cities or write words, but already they hold in their hands the beginnings of everything that will come: art, memory, faith, and love. The world is still vast and wild, but within its frozen heart something has awakened. Humanity, small and trembling, has lit its first fire. And though the cold may try to claim it, that light will never fade. As the night deepens, the fire burns low. The people curl close together, wrapped in fur and trust. The wind sings outside, brushing softly against their shelters, carrying the voice of the world that birthed them. Somewhere beyond the ice, the stars shimmer distant and eternal. They do not yet know how far their journey will take them, but they have already begun. And so the Ice Age continues, cold, vast, and alive. But now, in its frozen silence, the sound of human breath joins the symphony of the earth. As the small fires of early humanity flickered across the frozen plains, something profound began to take shape. The people of the ice were no longer only surviving, they were beginning to remember, to dream, to see meaning in the stars above and the shadows around them. Their nights were long, their world harsh, but within those hours of darkness, the first spark of imagination was born. Around the firelight, words became stories, and stories became the warmth that no cold could steal away. The wind outside the shelter hummed low, carrying with it the voices of the ice and the sigh of the distant herds. Inside, the world was different. Here, the air glowed with amber light. A fire burned at the center of a small circle of people, a mother, her child, a hunter resting his weary hands upon his knees, an elder with eyes that had seen too many winters. Shadows danced across the curved walls of mammoth hide, alive and gentle, their shapes bending and shifting like memories taking form. This was how the first stories began. Not written, not carved, but spoken softly, carried on breath and flame. They were stories meant to keep the darkness at bay, to explain what the heart already knew, but could not yet name. One voice would rise deep and rhythmic, weaving pictures in the air. The others would listen, their eyes wide, their minds painting worlds far beyond the frozen edge of their camp. Sometimes the stories were about the hunt of the mammoth who taught humans courage, of the reindeer who outran the storm. Other times they were about the fire itself, that mysterious spirit that had come to live among them. They spoke of how it was born from lightning captured by brave hands and taught to stay to feed on wood and whisper in warmth. The elders said that fire was alive, that if treated with respect, it would protect them. If neglected, it would vanish, leaving only cold and darkness in its wake. These stories were more than myths. They were lessons wrapped in wonder. Through them, children learned the laws of their fragile world, how to listen to the wind, how to follow the stars, how to see the divine in the ordinary. And as the fire crackled, its light flickering across their faces, something ancient and sacred passed between them, the birth of meaning. Outside, the night stretched endlessly. The stars hung low, shimmering like frost scattered across the heavens. The people believed those stars were the eyes of their ancestors, watching from beyond the cold. When the aurora appeared, a soft river of green and violet flowing through the dark, they whispered that the sky was alive, that it was listening. The stories told around the fire became bridges between heaven and earth, between what was known and what was imagined. There was a rhythm to these nights. The fire would start with a sharp crack, then settle into a steady hum. Voices would rise and fall like the breath of the earth itself. A mother might hum softly to her child. A hunter might carve patterns into a piece of bone while he listened, and the elders' words would fill the air, slow and deliberate, each syllable carrying the weight of memory. The smoke curled upward in silver ribbons, carrying their words to the stars. In time, the stories began to change. They were no longer only about the world outside. They became about the world within. People began to tell of dreams, of visions seen during sleep, of spirits that whispered in the mind. They believed that when they closed their eyes, they entered another kind of world, one where the past and the future touched. And in those dreams, they found guidance. The hunter dreamed of where the herds would pass. The mother dreamed of her child growing strong. The elder dreamed of the warmth that would return when the ice finally withdrew. By the glow of the fire, the people painted their dreams on cave walls. Using fingers and simple tools, they drew shapes in ochre and charcoal, mammoths, bison, deer, the outlines of their own hands pressed against the stone. Each image was both a memory and a prayer. In those drawings, life was preserved beyond the moment, beyond the flame. Long after the fires burned out, the walls would still speak. And even now, thousands of years later, their voices still echo in the darkness of those caves. The act of storytelling was more than comfort. It was creation. Every word shaped the world anew. Each listener became a guardian of the tale, remembering it, retelling it, changing it slightly with each passing generation. Through these stories, humanity began to connect not only with the land, but with one another. Around the fire, they were not hunters or gatherers or wanderers. They were a people bound by shared memory and shared hope. Sometimes the stories grew quiet. The fire dimmed. The people would stare into the embers, lost in thought, as if they could see all of history hidden within the glowing coals. The silence was not empty. It was full, thick with understanding. The Ice Age world was not cruel in those moments. It was vast, mysterious, and holy. The cold outside no longer felt like an enemy, but like a teacher, stern, unyielding, yet always present. For these early humans, faith did not come from temples or gods carved in stone. It came from the fire's light, from the stars above, from the rhythm of breath and heartbeat in the darkness. Their religion was wonder. Their prayer was story. Their altar was the earth itself. They did not ask the heavens to change the world, they asked only to understand it. And as they spoke their stories into the night, something eternal took root. The idea that through words one could hold back the cold, could preserve warmth even in the face of endless winter. That truth became the essence of humanity, to find light even when surrounded by darkness. When dawn finally came pale and silent, the people would rise. The fire would die down to a soft glow. Ashes would fall like gray snow, and the world outside would still be frozen. Yet within them burned something brighter than the sun. The stories had given them strength. They had turned fear into memory into meaning. And so the people of the ice continued their journey, carrying their fires from camp to camp, carrying their stories within their hearts. Each flame was a continuation of the first one ever lit. Each tale was another step away from the darkness, another bridge toward the future. The Ice Age had shaped their bodies, but the stories, the songs, the dreams, the flickering lights had shaped their souls. And as the snow fell once more covering their footprints, the firelight remained glowing softly in the heart of humankind. Tomorrow that light would follow them into the caves, where they would leave behind not just their voices, but their visions, painting their faith upon stone, so that even the ice could not erase it. Long after the last flame of the night flickered into smoke, the stories remained carried on the breath of those who had spoken them, remembered by those who listened. The fire had not only given warmth, but had opened a door to something greater, the awakening of the human soul. As dawn broke over the frozen plains, the light touched more than the earth, it touched imagination itself. The same hands that had built shelters and hunted mammoths would soon leave behind something that could not be buried by snow or time, the first art, the first prayer, the first memory carved into stone. Deep within the belly of the earth, where sunlight could never reach, flickered another kind of light, the glow of torches pressed between stone walls. The air was cool and heavy, filled with the scent of earth and smoke. Shadows danced against the curves of the cave, moving like living spirits. In those shadows, humanity found its mirror. It began with a single mark, a handprint pressed against stone, the outline of a life declaring, "I am here." The first artists did not paint for glory nor to decorate. They painted because something inside them longed to be seen, to connect, to remember. The walls became their canvas, their silent audience, their sacred altar. They painted animals, mammoths, bison, reindeer, horses, creatures that roamed the world above, drawn with care and reverence. Each stroke was a prayer, each figure a conversation between the human heart and the mystery of creation. The caves glowed with the colors of the earth: ochre, charcoal, clay, blood. They ground stones to make pigment, mixed it with fat or water, and used their finger sticks or hollow bones to blow paint onto the wall. The result was astonishing. The walls came alive. Under the trembling torchlight, the painted animals seemed to move: herds running, lions, prowling mammoths marching through the dark. It was as if life itself had been captured in motion, preserved forever in the stillness of stone. For those early humans, art was not a pastime. It was a sacred act. The cave was their temple, the earth their witness. Before entering, they often performed rituals, singing softly, burning herbs, whispering to the spirits of the hunt. The paintings were not only images, they were promises, hopes, and invocations. By drawing the animal, they honored it, asking for its spirit's blessing. They believed that the image held power, the same power that guided their lives through the ice and wind. Imagine standing there, torch in hand, watching the flicker of light reveal a shape on the wall. You see the curve of a mammoth's tusk, the arch of a horse's neck, the outline of a bison mid-leap. You realize that what you are seeing is not merely art, but memory. The record of eyes that once saw the same world, hearts that once beat with the same awe. The cave becomes more than a shelter. It becomes a bridge through time. The artists worked in silence, but their silence was full of meaning. The only sounds were the drip of water, the crackle of the torch, the slow breath of the earth. As they painted, they became part of something larger, a rhythm that transcended hunger and cold. It was the first expression of faith, not in words or gods, but in beauty itself. To create was to believe. Outside, the Ice Age world still roared with wind and survival. But inside these caverns, the soul had found its refuge. It was here that humanity learned the power of imagination, the ability to see beyond the visible, to create something that did not yet exist. From these first drawings would grow everything that would one day define civilization: symbols, language, story, and song. In one chamber, a figure stood, half human, half animal, a mysterious being drawn with horns and a face like a man. Perhaps it was a shaman, a bridge between the world of flesh and spirit. Perhaps it was an image of transformation, of how humans saw themselves as part of all life, not separate from it. Whatever its meaning, it spoke of a profound awareness that the world was not just something to survive in, but something to understand. The walls also bore patterns, spirals, lines, dots, handprints, symbols that no one today can fully decipher. But they repeat across caves and continents, suggesting a shared language of the soul. It was as if across the vast frozen earth, humanity had begun to speak to itself in the same ancient tongue, the language of wonder. These caves were not empty after the painters left. Their silence held echoes, the faint hum of songs once sung, the warmth of breath that lingered long after the torches burned out. For millennia, they waited in darkness, their paintings untouched, guarded by time itself. And when they were rediscovered thousands of years later, the world stood still, again humbled by the realization that beauty had existed even when survival seemed impossible. It is said that to create art is to defy oblivion. Perhaps that is why in the coldest age of history, humanity chose not only to live, but to remember. The same hands that hunted and built and sheltered also reached beyond need. They reached toward meaning. The Ice Age was not only an age of endurance, it was an age of awakening. Beneath the weight of snow, beneath the silence of glaciers, the human spirit learned to speak. If you listen closely, you can still hear them, the artists of the dawn whispering through the stone. Their torches may have gone out, but their light remains flickering softly across time. The colors they used have faded, but their message has not. We were here. We saw. We felt. We dreamed. Outside the cave, the world waited, vast, white, endless. But inside, for the first time, humanity had created a place where eternity could be touched. The art was not an escape from the cold, but an answer to it, proof that warmth could exist within the heart, even when the world was frozen. And as the Ice Age continued, this newfound imagination would not stay confined to caves. It would spread into songs, tools, rituals, and the very way humanity saw the earth. For once you learn to see beauty, you cannot forget it. The people of the ice had discovered the light that would carry them through all ages to come, the light of creation. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, imagine those ancient torches flickering in the darkness, the walls glowing softly with color, and the echo of distant voices breathing life into stone. The world above is silent. The stars are frozen in place. But below the surface, in the warmth of fire and imagination, the heart of humanity beats on steady, bright, eternal. Long after the torches in the caves burned out, and the echoes of painted dreams faded into the stillness of stone, the world above continued to breathe. The snow still fell softly. The wind still whispered through the plains, and life, vast, ancient, and unbroken, moved forward. Humanity had learned to see beauty, to find meaning in creation. But the world around them was still immense and alive in its own language. The ice stretched far, the land endless, and upon it a kingdom unlike any other began to unfold. A realm of cold grasses, of endless skies, of life and death intertwined. If you could walk across the earth during the height of the Ice Age, you would find yourself in a place beyond imagination. A land both cruel and breathtaking. A living ocean of grass and frost, known today as the Mammoth Steppe. It stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from the edge of Spain to the coast of Alaska. A frozen savanna that connected continents through silence and endurance. It was the largest ecosystem the planet had ever known, and though it seems harsh by our eyes, it was for its time the cradle of life. The air there was thin and cold, filled with the scent of snow and dust. Beneath your boots, the ground would crunch, softly frozen, but alive with roots hidden below. The horizon seemed infinite, a white and gold shimmer beneath a pale blue sky. In the distance, shapes moved, vast herds of woolly mammoths, their silhouettes dark against the glinting snow. Beside them grazed shaggy rhinoceroses, steppe bison, wild horses, and reindeer. The earth trembled under their slow, rhythmic steps, and the air pulsed with the quiet harmony of survival. The Mammoth Steppe was a paradox, frozen yet fertile. Though the winters were brutal, the summers brought brief explosions of life. The sun, low but unyielding, melted the snow just enough for grasses and herbs to burst through. In that short season, the plains transformed, a tapestry of gold and green beneath the endless sky. Flowers opened and closed within days, their colors fleeting but vivid, a reminder that beauty could bloom even in the coldest heart of the world. Here, every creature played its part in the rhythm of existence. The mammoths, with their sweeping tusks and shaggy coats, were the silent architects of the land. They trampled paths through snow-cleared patches for grass to grow, and scattered seeds as they wandered. The bison followed, grazing the tender shoots that sprang up in their wake. Wolves, lean and powerful, shadowed them from afar, their howls echoing across the plains. A song of hunger, of persistence, of life, balanced on the edge of ice. Above the sky was a constant presence, vast, open, and alive with motion. Clouds drifted like ghosts across the sun. At night, the stars appeared closer than ever, burning bright and unblinking, their light caught in the frost that blanketed the grass. The wind never rested. It whispered through the plains, carrying the scent of earth, the sound of distant herds, and the promise of change. The wind was both companion and sculptor, shaping everything it touched. Imagine walking through that world, your breath turning to mist, your footsteps swallowed by snow, your senses sharpened by silence. You would feel the immensity of the land, the endlessness of the horizon. You might hear the low rumble of mammoths far away, or the sudden cry of a hawk cutting through the air. It was a world that asked for humility. To live here was not to conquer, but to belong. For the early humans who journeyed across this landscape, it was both home and test. They followed the herds hunting, not in greed, but in gratitude. They learned the language of the wind, how to read its patterns, how to find shelter when storms came rolling across the plains. They walked alongside wolves, watched the migration of reindeer, and learned to move with the rhythm of the seasons. To them, the mammoth steppe was not an empty place. It was sacred ground, alive with spirit and story. At dusk, when the sun sank behind the white horizon, the land turned to gold. The shadows of the herds stretched long, and the air grew still. The people gathered near fires, small and flickering against the vastness, their songs rising into the cold air. They sang not to fill the silence, but to honor it, to remind the world that they too were part of its breath. Their voices blended with the wind until there was no boundary between them, just one long sigh of life, continuing against all odds. Predators and prey shared this balance. The saber-toothed cat, with its curved fangs gleaming, hunted beneath the pale moon. The giant short-faced bear roamed the valleys, its roar carried by the wind. Yet even they were bound by the same rule that governed all. Take only what is needed and give back in death what life had given. This unspoken harmony kept the steppe alive for tens of thousands of years. But time, like wind, is always moving. Seasons shifted, the earth tilted, and the warmth began to creep northward again. The glaciers would one day melt, the grasslands would fade, and the mammoth steppe would become a memory buried beneath layers of soil and ice. Yet for a moment, a long, shimmering moment in the age of the world, it was perfect. Today, if you stand on the tundra of Siberia or the plains of Alaska and close your eyes, you can almost feel it. The ground still holds the bones of those giants, their tusks curled like frozen waves. The soil still carries the seeds of grasses that once fed herds so vast they darkened the horizon. The wind still whispers across those lands, carrying echoes of the past, the low call of mammoths, the distant laughter of fires on the plain, the heartbeat of a world both fierce and tender. The mammoth steppe was more than a landscape. It was a memory of balance, a reminder that life endures even in the harshest of worlds. It was the Earth's greatest experiment in coexistence, a symphony written in ice and wind, in hoofbeats and snow. And as we leave this frozen kingdom behind, the story moves once more toward change. The Earth, still restless beneath its white skin, begins to turn again toward warmth. The glaciers will soon tremble and crack. The rivers will rise, and the ice will begin its long retreat. But before it goes, listen just once more to the sound of the wind across the steppe. It is the voice of a vanished world, still singing softly in the language of time. The wind over the mammoth steppe began to change. It no longer sang only of endurance, but of awakening. The air, once sharp and dry, softened with the scent of melting snow. Rivers that had slept for ages beneath layers of ice began to stir, whispering through cracks in the frozen ground. The world, after tens of thousands of years of winter, was ready to breathe again. The ice that had carved mountains and shaped valleys now began to retreat, not in anger, but in exhaustion. The long dream of the earth was ending, and from its stillness, life was about to stir anew. It began quietly. There was no sudden thunder, no single day when the cold gave way to warmth. Instead, the change crept gently across the face of the earth, a whisper first, then a sigh. The glaciers, those sleeping giants of glass and time, began to move differently. Their great weight still pressed down upon the continents, but beneath their frozen hearts, water started to flow. Thin streams glimmered through the cracks like veins of light awakening in stone. Each drop was a miracle. Meltwater trickled from beneath the ice, gathered into rivulets, then into streams, and finally into rivers that wound their way across the barren land. These were the first songs of spring after 1,000,000 years of silence. The air grew heavier with moisture, the light a little warmer, the days a little longer. The sun lingered on the horizon as though reluctant to leave, painting the ice with shades of gold and rose. From the high ridges of the world, vast walls of ice began to weep. Glaciers that had once crushed mountains now shimmered in the sunlight, streaked with lines of blue that deepened like veins of living water. As they melted, they released everything they had carried for ages: stones, dust, memories. Boulders that had journeyed hundreds of miles were left stranded in new valleys, as if the earth had been quietly rearranging its thoughts. Imagine standing at the edge of such a glacier. Before you, the air trembles with sound, the deep groan of ice shifting, the sudden crack of a fissure splitting open, the rush of meltwater cascading into the valley below. The ground beneath your feet hums with motion, and you realize that the world is waking, not slowly, but all at once. The rivers born from this awakening carve new paths through the soil, cutting canyons and forming lakes so vast they seem like new seas. These lakes glistened under a sky washed clean of dust. They reflected the light of the sun in trembling waves, their surfaces broken by icebergs drifting lazily toward the future. Beneath them, life returned. Tiny forms of algae bloomed, turning the water green with possibility. Fish followed, and then birds, dark wings cutting through the pale sky. The earth was no longer only a world of silence. It had begun to sing again. But the melting brought both beauty and destruction. As the glaciers withdrew, they unleashed floods so immense that entire valleys were swept away. Walls of water roared through the plains, tearing forests from their roots, scattering stones like leaves in the wind. Rivers that had once flowed quietly now thundered with power. They carved gorges deep enough to hold the memory of those floods forever. Even today, the scars remain, the channels, the cliffs, the winding paths of vanished torrents. Yet in the wake of that chaos, something new always followed. Where the floods receded, the soil they left behind was rich and fertile, a gift from the ice. Grasses took root once more, spreading across the damp ground. Trees followed, slender at first, then tall and proud. Birch, pine, and willow reached upward, their branches trembling in the soft wind of rebirth. The tundra, once endless white, began to glow with green. Animals returned to this changing world. Reindeer roamed through the valleys, followed by wolves and foxes. Birds built their nests near the rivers, filling the air with song. Even the mammoths came down from the hills, their heavy steps stirring the new earth. The world that had been asleep for ages was awakening in layers: water first, then soil, then life. The people too followed the thaw. The hunters who had once tracked game across frozen plains now walked through meadows where wildflowers bloomed. They watched as rivers grew wider, as new lakes formed where ice had once stood, and they adapted as they always had. The fish they caught became new sources of sustenance, the trees new tools and shelter. To them, the melting was both promise and warning. The world they knew was vanishing beneath their feet, yet the one that replaced it shimmered with beauty beyond imagining. At night, they would sit by the water's edge and listen to the groaning of distant glaciers, the deep, slow voice of the earth letting go of its past. The sound was both mournful and magnificent. In their stories, they spoke of the ice as a living spirit, one that had protected and punished in equal measure. Now they said the spirit was sleeping, drifting away to let the world heal. As the centuries passed, the transformation continued. Forests spread across the plains, rivers grew calm, the air filled with warmth and scent pine grass, the faint sweetness of thawed soil. The sky changed too. The haze of dust that had lingered for millennia cleared, revealing a blue so pure it seemed newly born. The earth was remembering how to be young again. And yet, beneath this renewal, there was an ache, the quiet sadness of endings. The ice, though retreating, left behind reminders of what it once was. In the high mountains, remnants of glaciers still glistened like tears. In the deep north, the cold refused to vanish completely, holding fast to the memory of winter. Even as life flourished, the balance was fragile. Every drop of meltwater carried both hope and loss. If you were to close your eyes and listen, you could still hear it, the steady dripping of water from the heart of a glacier, the slow heartbeat of a world in transition. The sound was not sorrowful, but wise. It spoke of patience, of renewal, of the eternal cycle that binds creation and destruction. When the earth finally exhaled fully, and the last great glaciers withdrew to the poles, what remained was a world transformed, valleys carved by rivers, plains rich with life, skies alive with birds. The age of ice had passed, but its memory lived on in every mountain and lake, every stone smoothed by the passage of time. The people who walked this reborn world carried its lessons within them, that even the coldest heart can melt, that even endings can be beginnings, and that nothing in nature, not even ice, lasts forever. As the rivers continued to flow, and the sun climbed higher in the sky, the earth turned its face toward warmth and renewal. But not all who had survived the long winter would follow. Some giants of the frozen age lingered still, unaware that their time was fading, and soon their story would become the next chapter in the great song of change. The glaciers had finally begun their long retreat, whispering farewells as they vanished into the valleys they once ruled. Rivers flowed where walls of ice had stood, and the air grew heavy with warmth and promise. Yet the earth in its awakening did not rise gently from its slumber. The melting of ages released forces beyond imagination, floods that reshaped continents, torrents that carried away mountains. The world newly reborn trembled under the weight of its own renewal. It began with a sound not thunder, but something deeper. A low, unending groan that rolled through the valleys like the voice of the earth itself. Deep beneath the melting glaciers, rivers of trapped water had gathered for centuries, held in place by walls of ice, as old as memory. Now those walls began to crumble. One by one they cracked and split apart, their frozen hearts giving way to the unstoppable force within. The flood had begun. The first torrents tore through the land like living creatures, wild, powerful, unstoppable. Entire valleys disappeared beneath the rush of water. Boulders the size of houses were lifted and carried as if they were leaves. Trees were uprooted, mountainsides stripped bare. The noise was deafening, the crash of collapsing ice, the hiss of churning water, the roar of a world remade. It was chaos, but it was also creation, a cleansing, a rewriting of the Earth's face, across what would one day be North America. The great glacial lakes burst forth their icy prisons, shattered by the warmth of a changing world. One such lake, larger than all the Great Lakes combined, unleashed a flood so vast, it carved new rivers across the continent, sculpting valleys and canyons that still bear its mark today. The floodwaters rushed toward the sea, carving deep channels through stone, forming waterfalls that thundered with the might of the ages. In those moments, the earth seemed alive, breathing, moving, shaping itself anew. The old world of ice was dissolving, and from its remains a different beauty was being born. The floodwaters, though fierce, left behind a gift, fertile soil carried from the mountains, spread like a blessing across the plains. When the waters receded, green would follow. The ground once locked in frost was now rich and ready to bloom. Imagine standing on a hill watching as the flood passes below. The horizon shimmers with light, not from the sun, but from the water itself, an endless sheet of silver moving with purpose. The air smells of rain and life, of soil turned fresh and new. It is terrifying, yes, but also magnificent. You can feel even through the fear that something sacred is happening. The earth is cleansing itself, preparing for another chapter. In the centuries that followed, the floods calmed their fury, softened into stillness. The vast torrents that had torn through valleys now rested, as lakes, deep, quiet mirrors that reflected the reborn sky. They filled the hollows carved by the ice, each one unique, each one a memory of the chaos that birthed it. Some stretched for hundreds of miles, glistening beneath the pale sun. Others hid in mountain shadows, their waters clear as glass. The Great Lakes, those immense inland seas, were among the children of this transformation. Fed by the meltwater of ancient glaciers, they spread across the heart of the continent like jewels set into stone. Around them, forests began to grow, slender birches first, then pines, then the thick green canopies of new life. Birds returned their calls, echoing across the calm surface of the water. The land that had once been a frozen wasteland now shimmered with color and sound. Elsewhere, rivers took their new paths. The Mississippi began its slow, meandering journey to the sea. The Volga, the Danube, The Thames all found their courses in the wake of the melting. Across the planet, the veins of the earth rearranged themselves, carrying life wherever they flowed. Water once locked in stillness became movement, a constant living force. But the change was not without loss. Entire species, once masters of the ice, now found themselves strangers in a warmer world. The great woolly mammoths wandered south, searching for the tundra that was vanishing beneath their feet. The mighty woolly rhinoceros disappeared, unable to adapt. Even the fierce, saber-toothed cats began to fade, their reign quietly ending beneath the new green dawn. It was a time of both mourning and renewal, the passing of one age into another. Humanity watched all this with awe. They had seen the floods and survived. They had watched rivers appear where none had been watched. Lakes filled the valleys where they once hunted. To them it was a mystery beyond reason, a divine act, a sign that the earth itself lived and spoke. Around their fires they began to tell stories of the waters, tales of great spirits who had swept across the land, cleansing it of the old so that new life could rise. These stories would echo through generations, becoming the myths of flood and rebirth told in every corner of the world. When the waters finally settled and the sun grew warm again, the land was unrecognizable. The glaciers, now ghosts on the horizon, continued to retreat. In their wake lay plains rich with promise. The rivers glittered like silver threads, stitching the world together once more. The lakes gleamed with quiet majesty, holding the sky in their reflection. The air, for the first time in ages, smelled of warmth, of soil, of leaves, of life. The people began to move again, following the rivers into the heart of this new world. They built camps along the shores of the lakes, where fish were plentiful and the air was gentle. They drank from the clear water, hunted in the new forests, and watched the seasons return in their full glory. It must have felt like waking from a dream, the first true spring after an eternal winter. And yet deep within the mountains, some ice remained. Vast white fields still slept beneath the clouds, a reminder that nothing in nature is ever truly gone. The earth, though reborn, carried the memory of what had come before, the patience of the glaciers, the power of the floods, the balance between destruction and renewal. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear it. The slow drip of melting ice, the murmur of distant rivers, the gentle lap of water against the shores of a newborn lake. The earth is at peace again, its heart steady, its song soft and endless. From that great cleansing came the world we know, the rivers we follow, the lakes we gaze upon, the soil we walk upon. They are not only landscapes, they are echoes of an ancient transformation. And though the ice has long since withdrawn, its story remains written in the ripples of water, in the curves of valleys, in the quiet memory of the land that once dreamed beneath the snow. The floods that had reshaped the world slowly quieted, leaving behind vast lakes and gentle rivers that reflected the newborn sun. Forests spread where ice had once ruled, and meadows burst into color. It was the earth's long exhale after ages of cold. But not everything that had walked through the frost could follow this new dawn. The giants of the Ice Age, those magnificent creatures that had defined a frozen world, began to fade from the horizon. Their time, like the snow that once covered the mountains, was slipping away. At first it was only a few, a herd missing from the plains, the silence of a valley where once the thunder of hooves had shaken the air. The change was subtle, almost tender, a whisper of loss carried on the wind. But as the seasons turned and the sun grew stronger, it became clear the age of giants was ending. The earth was warming, and with it the great beasts that had ruled for millennia were slowly vanishing into memory. The woolly mammoth, once the undisputed monarch of the frozen world, wandered across the thinning tundra, its massive form outlined against skies that grew brighter each year. Its fur, made for an age of endless winter, now shimmered in sunlight that felt too warm, too insistent. The grasses that had once fed entire herds began to dwindle as the soil changed and the rains grew unpredictable. Lakes swallowed the old trails. Forests rose where there had once been open plains. The world that had sustained them was slipping quietly away. In the north, small groups of mammoths persisted, stubborn and solemn, moving across islands of cold that still clung to the last breath of ice. They carried the wisdom of ages in their slow, deliberate steps, as though remembering a rhythm that no longer belonged to the earth. The calves trotted close to their mothers, unaware that they were the last of their kind. When they lifted their trunks to the sky and trumpeted into the wind, the sound echoed through emptier and emptier valleys, a call not of power, but of farewell. The saber-toothed cat, once the fearsome ruler of the hunt, began to vanish as its prey disappeared. Built for ambush and cold, it could not adapt to the new forests where trees tangled its path and prey moved differently. Its great fangs, once symbols of mastery, became burdens. The dire wolf followed its deep voice, no longer answering across the plains at dusk. The reindeer, the musk ox, the great ground sloth, all began to retreat northward, chasing the cold that was fleeing from them. The earth was becoming softer, greener, more forgiving. But in that gentleness, there was loss. The power and majesty of the frozen age were giving way to a quieter, more temperate world. It was as if the planet itself, weary of struggle, had chosen peace at the cost of its oldest children. And humanity, who had shared the fire and the hunt with these creatures, now watched them vanish one by one. Around campfires that burned beneath the warming stars, stories began to change. The mammoth was no longer a creature of daily life, but a figure of memory and legend. People spoke of them in reverent tones of beasts who carried the snow on their backs, who had walked beside the first humans through the endless white. The drawings on cave walls, once records of survival, became monuments to remembrance. The mammoth, painted in ochre and ash, became a spirit of the past, immortal in art, though gone from the plains. The world itself seemed to grieve. In the silence that followed the herd's passing, the land felt vast and empty. The wind no longer carried the scent of beasts. The rivers no longer shimmered with movement. The people noticed this silence. They felt it in their bones, the absence of the pulse that had once kept the world alive. In that quiet, humanity learned something new, that every age, no matter how grand, must end. Some believed the disappearance of the giants was punishment, that the earth, tired of being trampled by hooves and tusks, had chosen to rest. Others believed it was mercy, that the creatures of ice were being called home to a realm where the cold still lingered. And some, perhaps the wisest, simply bowed their heads and gave thanks that they had lived in the same age as the mammoth, the saber-tooth, and the great bear. For the humans, life changed once again. The forests that spread across the land brought new challenges, new opportunities. They learned to hunt smaller animals, to fish the rivers, to gather berries and roots. The fire that had once kept them alive through the dark winters now became a tool for clearing land, for shaping the world to their needs. Yet even as they adapted, something within them longed for the vastness of the old world, for the thrill of seeing giants move across the horizon like living mountains. Far to the north, on an island isolated by rising seas, a few mammoths survived. They were smaller now, their world reduced to grasslands no larger than a dream. For thousands of years after their kin had disappeared elsewhere, they continued to walk beneath the northern lights, their breath rising in the cold air like smoke. But even they could not escape time. When they too were gone, the earth grew still. The last echo of the Ice Age faded into silence. And yet, though their bodies returned to the soil, their story endured. Beneath the tundra, the ice kept their memory, bones, tusks, hair, even the shape of their last breath preserved in frozen earth. Thousands of years later, when humans dug into the permafrost, they would find them again, as if time itself had only paused. The mammoth, sleeping but not gone, would remind humanity that nothing is ever truly lost, that the past, like the earth, never forgets. The age of giants had ended, but their spirit remained written into the land itself. The valleys they carved became homes for new rivers. The grasslands they roamed became fields of plenty. Their passing made room for the future, for a gentler rhythm of life. And in every creature that followed, in every elephant, every ox, every deer, the echo of that strength endured. So when you look out over the wide plains or stand by the shores of an ancient lake, know that beneath your feet lie the memories of those who came before. The earth carries them still, the mammoth, the lion, the wolf, all sleeping in its deep memory, waiting in silence. The Ice Age had given them birth, and the warmth took them home. And though the giants no longer walked the earth, the world they shaped was ready for a new kind of life, a new kind of dream, one carried not by tusks and hooves, but by hearts and hands that remembered. And as the warmth continued to spread, the forests thickened, the skies softened, and the earth, reborn once more, invited humanity to begin again, not as wanderers of the frost, but as children of the sun. The world had changed once more. The thunder of hooves was gone, replaced by the whisper of leaves in the wind. The air that had once carried the cry of mammoths now shimmered with birdsong. What had been white for ages was turning green. The earth, freed from its frozen chains, was learning to live again. Forests stretched. Where tundra once lay, rivers flowed gently through valleys carved by glaciers, and sunlight touched the land with a warmth unseen for millennia. The age of ice had ended, and in its place, a new harmony was being born. Fragile, bright, and full of promise. At first, the change was slow, like dawn breaking over a world that had forgotten what light felt like. The snow melted from the mountain tops, uncovering the dark bones of the earth beneath. Water trickled down in silver threads, feeding rivers that grew fat and strong as they wound through the valleys. The once white plains softened into shades of brown, then gold, and finally green, a color that had almost vanished from memory. The world exhaled, and for the first time in 100,000 years it smelled of life. Grasses spread across the plains like a whispering tide, followed by flowers so bright they looked like scattered flames. Trees reached upward, their roots drinking from the meltwater of vanished glaciers. Birch, pine, and oak filled the air with new fragrances, the scent of growth replacing the stillness of frost. Everywhere, the sound of life returned, bees humming among blossoms, birds calling from branches, rivers murmuring to the stones. The earth was no longer a frozen cathedral of silence. It had become a living garden. For those who walked upon it, the transformation must have seemed like a miracle. The first humans of this warmer age awoke to a world reborn. The ice that had once threatened them was gone, and in its place came abundance. Where once they had hunted across frozen plains, they now gathered berries from the forest edge, fished in rivers clear as glass, and watched herds of deer move gracefully through the green. The land no longer tested their endurance, it invited them to stay. They learned to read this new world as they once read the patterns of snow. The color of leaves told them when the rains would come. The sound of frogs in the marshes signaled the changing of seasons. The rhythm of the sun and moon guided their days. For the first time, they were not just travelers through the land, they began to belong to it. They built shelters not only of bone and hide, but of branches and clay rooted like the trees they admired. Around their fires, they no longer spoke only of survival, but of gratitude. The earth itself seemed to glow under the new warmth. The rivers sparkled beneath the sun's long gaze, and at night the stars shone brighter, reflected in the still surfaces of lakes that had once been glaciers. The moon, no longer veiled by storms of snow, rose gently over quiet forests. It was as if the sky too had softened, the air clearer, the light gentler, the colors of dawn spreading in hues no human had ever seen before. Animals returned in new forms, smaller, quicker, suited for this gentler world. The great predators of ice gave way to wolves and bears who learned to live in the forests. Herds of elk and deer grazed in meadows that once lay buried under miles of snow. The birds came back in flocks, weaving the air with color and motion. Even the insects, forgotten architects of life, thrived, turning soil, carrying pollen, stitching together the fabric of the earth's renewal. And beneath the ground, unseen by the living, the remnants of the Ice Age, slept bones of mammoths and saber-tooths, fossils of beasts that had once ruled. They lay in the earth's memory, preserved beneath layers of time. The soil they rested in was rich with their legacy, their bodies feeding the trees that now swayed above. In this way, even in death they gave life. The new world was built upon their sacrifice. Humans too began to change with the land. No longer bound to the endless wandering of the hunt, they learned to stay and sow. The seeds they dropped by accident near their shelters took root, and from those roots came the first gardens. Wheat, barley, and millet grew beneath their hands, each harvest tying them more closely to the earth. The world had turned from ice to soil, and from soil to home. They began to celebrate the turning of the seasons, to mark the solstice, to honor the rain, to thank the rivers. In their hearts grew a new understanding that life was not a battle to be fought, but a gift to be tended. The sky became their calendar, the soil their teacher. Where once they had followed the stars to survive, they now watched them simply to remember that they belonged to something vast and beautiful. In this age of green, time felt different. The urgency of survival gave way to the rhythm of growth. The people built hearths of stone-shaped pottery from clay, and sang songs not of fear, but of wonder. The stories of the ice age of mammoths and floods, of endless cold and miraculous survival, were passed down as legends, reminders of what once was and what must never be forgotten. Around each fire they spoke of the world's great transformation, how the earth had endured the storm, and how, in its mercy, it had allowed them to endure too. And yet the memory of ice never fully left them. In the far distance, the last glaciers still glimmered under the sun, quiet reminders of an age that had shaped everything. When the wind blew from the north, it still carried a breath of that ancient cold, a whisper of the patience and strength that had forged the world they now called home. The people understood in their own quiet way that the warmth they enjoyed was not permanent, that all things on earth moved in cycles. They had seen the world freeze and thaw, sleep and wake. So they learned to live in harmony with its rhythms, not to take more than they needed, not to forget that the same forces that gave life could also take it away. As the forests deepened and rivers swelled, the earth reached a balance it had not known in an age. The wounds of the ice began to heal. Valleys once scarred by glaciers grew lush with moss and fern. Birds nested in cliffs carved by ancient floods. The planet was alive in every breath, every leaf, every ripple of water. And when night came quiet, cool, eternal, the people would look to the stars and remember. They would whisper to their children about the time when the world was made of snow and silence, and how the sun had brought them into a new dawn. It was not just the earth that had been reborn, it was the soul of humanity too, learning once more to find wonder in every green thing, and gratitude in the warmth that wrapped their world like a gentle hand. The Ice Age had ended, but its spirit lived on in the land, in the rivers, in the soil, in the memory of all that had been lost and found again. And so the earth turned green, and in its renewal it whispered the oldest truth of all, that even after the longest winter, spring will always return. The green world had finally come to life. Forests rustled with wind and bird-song, rivers danced in sunlight, and the earth, once heavy with ice, now pulsed with warmth. Humanity had learned to plant, to stay, to sing with the seasons. Yet as life flourished, and the memory of frost began to fade, something deep within the earth remained, a quiet remembrance of the age that shaped it. Beneath the mountains, beneath the rivers, beneath the soil, where seeds now grew, the ancient ice still whispered its story. The world had not forgotten. It never does. Even as the sun poured warmth across the land, the remnants of the Ice Age slept quietly beneath the surface, a frozen heart beating deep within the earth. In the high mountains where the air was thin, patches of ancient ice still clung to the rock like faded scars glinting under the summer light. These last glaciers, small and shy, seemed to breathe in rhythm with the clouds. They were reminders of all that had come before, of the centuries of silence, of the storms that once carved the world into being. If you could walk among them, you would hear more than wind. The ice itself speaks softly but surely in the language of memory. It creaks and sighs with each breath of warmth, releasing droplets of water that fall like tears from another time. Each drop carries a story, the breath of mammoths, the dust of old fires, the air once inhaled by people who lived when the world was still white. In every meltwater stream that trickles down the mountainside, the past is flowing toward the present, connecting what was to what is. The earth remembers everything. The shape of a valley, the curve of a hill, the path of a river, all are written in the language of ice. The great glaciers that once stretched across the continents have long since vanished, but their touch remains. They carved the lakes where we now sail, smoothed the plains where we now build scattered stones across fields like messages left for the future. Every rock tells a story of movement, of patience, of time, measured not in years but in breaths of the planet itself. And though the age of ice has passed, its spirit endures in the rhythm of the earth. The seasons still echo its balance. Winter's sleep, spring's awakening, summer's abundance, autumn's release. Every snowfall is a faint echo of the world that once was every gust of northern wind, a whisper from the glaciers that dreamed the shape of the land. The cold still lives in the marrow of the mountains, in the deep ocean currents that remember the chill of millennia. Even now, the earth carries within it both the fire that creates and the frost that preserves. For humanity, the memory of the Ice Age lives not only in stone and water, but in the heart. Somewhere deep within, we still remember what it was like to gather close around a fire, to face the endless night with courage and faith. The stories our ancestors told of survival, of endurance, of beauty, born from struggle, still flow through us. The same instincts that once guided us across frozen plains now guide us through the changing seasons of our own lives. We are children of the ice, as much as we are children of the sun. If you listen closely, you can still feel it, not as fear, but as reverence. The earth teaches in cycles, reminding us that nothing lasts forever, and yet nothing is ever truly lost. The glaciers that melted gave birth to rivers. The beasts that perished nourished the soil. The silence that once covered the world allowed life to begin anew. From death came life, and from stillness came movement. It is the oldest truth in nature and perhaps the most sacred. Sometimes when night falls and the world grows quiet, you can almost hear it again, that deep, slow heartbeat of the earth beneath your feet. It is steady, timeless, patient. It has felt the weight of ages and still endures. Long after the last human voice fades, long after our own fires go out, the earth will keep breathing, reshaping itself with the same grace it has always known. Time, like the ice, will flow on. The mountains will erode. The rivers will change their course. And one day, perhaps, the cold will return. Another age may come when snow once again claims the land and the cycle begins anew. But even then, it will not be an ending, only another chapter in the story the earth has always told. For this planet, our home is not a static place. It is alive, dreaming in long, slow rhythms that we can only glimpse in fleeting moments. And in those moments, when you stand by a still lake and see the sky mirrored perfectly on its surface, when you walk through a valley carved smooth as glass, when you hold a stone that was once part of a mountain 1,000 miles away, you are touching that dream. You are hearing the whisper of ice and time, the eternal song that connects all living things. We are part of that song. Every breath we take carries traces of the ancient air once trapped in the glaciers. Every drop of water we drink has flowed through countless ages, shaped by the same hands of wind and time that molded the earth. We are not separate from the world that came before us. We are its continuation, the latest verse in a melody that began long before our names were spoken. So when you look out over the land, the rolling hills, the rivers, the forests, bright with life, Remember that it was the ice that made this beauty possible. Remember that even in its coldness, the earth was creating, preparing for the warmth to come. The glaciers were not enemies of life. They were its sculptors, shaping the cradle in which we now live. And when the night grows quiet, when the wind moves softly through the trees, imagine that you can hear the faint echo of that ancient age, the steady breath of a planet that has endured, forgiven, and renewed itself countless times. It is the same breath that moves within you now. The Ice Age has ended, but its story lives forever in water, in stone, in us. The world that once lay silent beneath the snow still speaks not in words, but in the pulse of rivers, in the whisper of leaves, in the rhythm of your own heart. Listen closely, and you'll hear it too. The voice of the earth, gentle and eternal, reminding us that even after the longest winter, there will always come a dawn.